Do you think there's ever a possibility of a flat tax and how do we feel about it? Not a VIP tax.
Well, I believe in a fair tax. And a fair tax, there's two things you can look at, a flat tax and a fair tax. I believe we need to take the complication out of our tax system. I'm a CPA. I've done as many tax returns as most. I would be very much in favor of a fair tax. The problem is implementing that. And I think what we need to be able to do is take a look at it and start a program to get to that point, but it's not something you can do overnight. But I would be all in favor of getting us closer to a fair tax system. I don't know if I answered.
I guess I'm asking whether it's realistic that we could get to that.
Absolutely. No, I think it can be. I think what you got to do is you got to say we're going to do it, and you got to put elected officials in who believe in it, and then you got to get it done. Yes, I do believe so.
Jim, first of all, I want to say I appreciate you running with your background. This country needs folks who understand how the economy works and what makes America work. At the rate that this Congress keeps shoving down legislation down the pipe and getting it passed, the Wall Street penalty legislation that they're trying right now, at the rate things are going, is probably going to be passed, unfortunately. But I guess, what are your thoughts on how to resolve the penalizing our financial system and just the way we do business?
Right. Well, again, the more and more regulations, government, you heard me say that I'm against more and more government. And I think ultimately, the more penalties you put on, the more regulations you put on, the more you stymie the ability for business to grow and prosper. But I will also tell you that I was never for some of the major contracts and some of the major compensation that some of these Wall Street executives took, primarily on their way out. If you think about it, a lot of these were poison pills or whatever, parachutes on their way out. And I'm a firm believer that those kind of things are problematic to our system. But I also do believe that we have remember I said personal responsibility, we have shareholders and we have management that needs to make sure, and boards, corporate boards, that need to be able to set the parameters for those businesses to work. The fear I have is if government comes in and says, we're going to set the salaries here, even if it's corporate Wall Street, what do you think happens next? They come down to Main Street, corporate Main Street, and they start saying, we're going to set this and we're going to set that. That's a problem anytime you let government start to get involved in that deep into capitalism.
How about the additional parachute for failing banks? They haven't. My understanding is the legislation says that there's no end to bailouts. So I guess with that potential financial liability that we as taxpayers are going to have to potentially carry.
Well, I would tell you this: there is an end to bailouts because if you elect the right Congress people, they're going to end bailouts. We spent almost $4 trillion in bailouts last year. We are a capitalistic society. That means we take risks. That means you have failures. And I'm a firm believer that whenever you're in a capitalist society, as we are, you are going to have failures. And that's okay. Because as the one farmer told me in Wayne County, and I use this example, when the big tree doesn't have enough strong roots underneath it to hold that tree up, it's going to fall. When it falls, there's a lot more sunshine, and that tree actually disintegrates into the ground and feeds the smaller trees so the smaller trees can grow. That's capitalism. When the government comes in and puts that big tree back up, what's the government do? They take those bulldozers and they rip down all the little trees around that big tree and they tear all the small business down. That's not capitalism. That's what we did with General Motors. We reset that tree back up. It wasn't strong enough, and my opinion is it's still not strong enough, and I fear that it's going to fall again. And that's a problem. You have to let corporations fail when they've done the wrong thing and they haven't rooted themselves into the ground strong enough to stay up.
Jim, in Doylestown a couple of weeks ago, one of the questions was what will your opposition bring up as far as skeletons in the closet? The Daily Record, I think the first part of this week, had some issues about tax returns in 02 and 04 and the penalties. Would you explain that to us?
Well, actually, if you read the article, I'm pretty proud of what happened there. And you're right. Here's what's going to happen. Somebody told me this 6 months ago. When you're getting closer to the target of winning, they're going to fire everything at you to try and bring you down. All right? Sad to say, I probably didn't believe it as much 6 months ago as I do today. All right? So isn't it a shame that the people that I'm running against seem to find little things in your past, but they don't explain them properly. They don't tell the whole story. That story that came out, and if you read it, I was one of almost 1,000 people in this state where the tax commissioner did a retroactive tax. He basically said, we're going to go back and we're going to tax everybody on these estates, a state tax. And quite frankly, when he did that to me, I said, no, you're not. I filed the returns, I put it on there, and I disclosed it. In fact, you'll find, if you really look at the story, it says it. I put right on that tax return, I do not believe you have the authority to do this. And ultimately, I was told by the AG's office in the state of Ohio, you know what? We're going to make a what's the word I want to use? Example out of you. And I said, that's okay. Well, if you continue to fight this, we're going to charge you penalties and interest. And there were a lot of people that, if you read the article, decided to say, I'm jumping off, I'm not going forward. I took it all the way. To this day, I still believe I'm right, but once the judicial system, the Supreme Court in Ohio, said this was a tax that was allowed, this retroactive tax, I paid it. And I'll be honest with you, if I could have went to the federal Supreme Court, I would have. But I found out that I was stuck at the state because it was a state issue. So when you look at that issue, you need to look at it from a positive side. Jim Renacci will always defend the rights of every one of you when I'm in Congress, because that's what I've done my whole history. Now, I will go back and say, 30 years of business, over 60 companies that I've owned and operated. You better believe that I've had lawsuits during those 30 years, because that's what I remember answering at the Doylestown, and I would tell you all this, because there's no businessman. We just had a meeting today at lunch. I had it with a bunch of business people, and I really actually asked the questions. How many people have had issues over the years, legal issues within their business that they've had to fight? Every one of them said, hey, it's part of doing business. Well, guess what? When you have 60 companies, 30 years, you better believe I'm going to have them. But I will say this, never lost one. Some of them I probably took further than I should have because of principle, but I think you're going to like me over that situation. I've taken a lot of things down the road for principle and what I believe in versus how much is it going to cost you to continue to go down this road. So the answer to you is there are if I had to say what the opposition is going to try and do, they're going to try and go back over the years and say, you had this lawsuit, you had that lawsuit. That's all they have. And quite frankly, I'm proud of everything I've done over the last 30 years. I hope that all of you can take a look at that. Any business owner has to know lawsuits are part of it. But other than that, I don't know. I guess I got to wait because the next 2 weeks, I'm sure they're coming, whatever they got.
As a soon-to-be college graduate who is carrying loans, one of my biggest concerns is getting a job. So for 2 months now in a row, the unemployment rate's been at 9.7%. I know you mentioned cap and trade, but are there any specific plans that you want to implement that would lower that unemployment rate?
Sure. And remember what I said, certainty and predictability. I sat in a room today, and again, 10 business owners. What's the first thing? I didn't even say certainty and predictability. One of the guys said, I'm not hiring anybody. I'm on, I forget the word he used, but then he said, until I get certainty, he didn't say predictability, he said certainty. He said, we're not hiring anybody. We're worried about cap and trade. We're worried about our taxes. We're worried about what health care is going to do. We're worried about government spending. We're worried about how interest rates are going to rise. You can't keep borrowing the money we're borrowing without interest rates rising. So to answer your question is, we need to put people in Congress who can bring certainty and predictability back to the marketplace so people say, you know what, I'm comfortable. Now how do you bring certainty and predictability? How about forcing the government just to balance a budget, just to stay on track, just to stay within spending limits? How about that?